Today, I want to tell you a story about how a man was attempting to defend his place of business and shot someone in what he believed was self-defense and has now been in jail for over a year pending a trial. Let's get into it. There's a whole lot to unpack here. Most importantly, though, this ain't legal advice. I ain't a lawyer. A lot of what we're going to be talking about today is going to be referred to in generalities when it comes to some ways to consider what might be legal in your state versus what's in this state. We're going to use this as sort of a learning experiences to kind of break down what happened, the information that's been presented, and kind of see what it is that you think. Now, throughout this, I'm going to look for, hopefully you leave a comment, something like this. Tell me what you feel about it as far as whether or not you think this was justified in your opinion, and then also say whether or not you think it was justified legality wise. Because for me, what I think would be just versus what I think would be legal would be two very different things on many occasions, not just when it comes to gun rights and gun ownership. So in this situation, drop a comment once you kind of hear what's going on. Let me know how you feel about it, whether or not you think he was justified versus whether or not you think that what he did was legal to do. Now, before we get going though, I do want to say thank you to one of the sponsors of this channel, Route 66 Shooting Sport Park. If you missed my recent video, it was a awesome recap video showing the meetup event that we did. It was super cool getting to meet over like 1,700 people, ton of support from various vendors and companies that were local to the area. It was honestly one of the coolest things I've done when it comes to this YouTube channel. I also want to say thank you to my merch company, shallnotcomply.com. I got a link to that down below. If you buy anything through that store, even if it's not my merch, it will support me in this channel. So let's get into this topic today. He didn't go out looking for trouble. Oklahoma community rallies for black father charged with murder for shooting white burglar breaking into his business. First of all, personally, I'm not a big fan of talking about things when it comes to race unless race is actually relevant in the situation. And me personally, when I look at this specific interaction between two people, I don't necessarily feel that race really had much to do with it. Some people might differ in their opinion of whether or not they feel the black business owner was charged in a way that he would not have been charged if a white person did the same thing. But we got to kind of break down what actually happened. So the gist of what happens is that LaRue Bratcher, and I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that name, he owned a pot shop in Oklahoma City. Now the thing about medical marijuana is some states might have legalized it, but federally they still consider it like as illegal as heroin and meth. So when you operate a business, you're kind of in this weird stage of like, can you own guns? Well, if you're not an unlawful user of marijuana, but then if you're engaged in the business, it kind of becomes, you're engaging in felonious behavior at times, federally, regardless of what the state thinks. So it does get somewhat difficult with that. So let's break down what actually happened. So just for reference, this is the guy, the veteran, who was actually trying to defend his own property. Said on May 26, 2020, officers responded to a shooting at the shop where 42-year-old Daniel Hardwick had attempted to burglarize Bratcher's business. He was trying to break in when the business owner, who was inside the business at the time, apparently opened fire with a handgun, striking and killing the man who was breaking in. Now, Bratcher called 911, and after shooting Hardwick, according to his family, he intended to fire warning shots, but one of them struck the man, who was attempting to break in for the second night in a row. Court documents show Bratcher grabbed his gun when he heard someone at the back door and asked the stranger what he was doing before firing 3 shots. Bratcher told police at the time that the door was locked and secured when he started shooting. So apparently I think this is the guy that was shot. Now, here's the deal. Because he was operating a medical marijuana dispensary, he was in a position where he had his permits lapse. Now, keep in mind, permits are just permission slips from the government. Not having a permit does not make you an evil or bad person. Tax evasion is pretty cool. I think more people should do it. I'm just kidding. That's not legal advice. Don't take my advice on that. So he was in a position where he was having to renovate his facility prior to being able to run his business, and he let the permit lapse during that period of time. So when he was initially contacted by the police after he shot the guy, he wasn't arrested, but he was later arrested after the fact, where they confiscated like $1.5 million worth of marijuana, which is kind of insane to have that much money, just like that much valuable property just around, which is kind of just goes to show how much money there is in it. Now, he's originally booked for growing marijuana without a license, and his bond was set at $5,000. Later, the district attorney office reviewed the case. Bratcher was charged with second-degree murder. Now, let's kind of break down, now that we've talked about the situation as it kind of generally stands, let's talk about the issues here. In many states, if someone physically breaks in, meaning they knock down the door, meaning they forcibly enter, break a window, smash a window, get in, if they forcibly enter, that generally does give you what you would need to use lethal force. Now, to use lethal force in the state of California and many other states, generally the way it's worded is reasonable belief of great bodily injury or harm. Now, if someone's pulling at your door, do you generally right at that moment know that you can just shoot through the door? I don't necessarily know. I think it's a very difficult situation. It depends entirely on who you are, who the attacker is, how you two know each other. Are you a 80-year-old tiny woman that's being stalked and harassed with death threats from a dude who's 6'8", 250, pure muscle? It differs. So, but generally, if someone is just attempting to get into your store or into your house, you can't necessarily just shoot them. Now, does that mean that I think that we should be defending the lives of people who are committing violent crimes against people? I'm definitely going to be on the side when it comes to morality of the man who is trying to defend his business. I don't think that if you are fucking around and end up finding out, that we should necessarily feel bad for you in some cases. Now, there's nuance to that, obviously, but in this situation, I think it's very clear that the guy that was defending his business morally is most likely a good guy. But unfortunately, what he was doing was using unlawful force to defend his business. Now, this guy tried to break in previously and then was back the second day while he was at his business. I think that he's going to have a very hard time. When you fire what has been referred to by his family as warning shots, that fucks you. Warning shots are not a thing. Don't ever fire a warning shot. If you think that you need to use a firearm to defend yourself from great bodily injury or harm, or whatever standard that you have to meet in your state or locality, make sure that you only use that firearm to defend yourself from great bodily injury or harm, or whatever it is that you need to meet that standard. Warning shots are not a thing. Do not fire a warning shot. A warning shot or shooting to hurt or shooting to injure means that you weren't necessarily shooting to stop the threat. You can only use a gun, which is lethal force, if you think that someone dying is an acceptable outcome. So when you're firing warning shots, what you're saying is that you don't think they need to die at that moment, but you're going to use a firearm, which is always lethal force, to solve that problem. And in this case, it seems, if we're taking the word of the family who's speaking on his behalf, that he was firing a warning shot to scare him off, but then ended up shooting him on accident. It sucks because, some dude fucked around and found out, and unfortunately, the guy who was a veteran of the military and was trying to defend his property and his livelihood is now going to be spending maybe a good amount of time in jail. His guy has a family, probably a decent person. I don't really know anything about the guy, but do you think that someone breaking in should be shot if they haven't actually broken in or made any real progress? I don't know. I think it sort of depends. Like I said, if you are an old woman who has someone that is making death threats to you, and that person is just a fucking behemoth, like the mountain and from Game of Thrones is just going to crush your skull, I think that's a little bit different than what seems to be a very fit, very healthy dude defending himself from some other dude. I think it very much depends. I don't necessarily know how this is going to pan out, but I think he's going to have a very hard time defending this. At the end of the day, it all depends on how the district attorney wants to charge him. I don't know. Let me know what y'all think down below. At the end of the day, you know the drill. Have fun, be safe, stay dangerous. Peace.